The 7 deadly sins are a very notable gameplay mechanic in Limbus Company. They affect things like damage and clashing power. Sometimes. More importantly, they introduce a level of resource management into the game, being necessary to activate game-changing passives and use EGO. For the most part, this is about the extent this system is interacted with. It's never really referred to directly in the story of Limbus Company itself. Sure, Hohenheim describes the affinities in some detail in the checkup intervallo, but he's not really referring to the system itself, just the sins. Just about the only exception you can make is the Sign of Rose's observation log, where Honglu describes the Abnormalities mechanic of sapping EGO resources as emotion gangs snapped in half and bottled up feelings melting away. Considering Sign of Roses is one of the very few bosses able to manipulate the player's resources directly, it's particularly notable that we do get an in-universe explanation for how that can happen. And yet, it's still rather vague, isn't it? So what exactly are the sins? Project Moon does not tend to create a gameplay mechanic and leave it at that. Everything has reason and purpose for its existence in game, 3 games running. Hell, power creep in identities were justified in a random stream the director did. Such a big mechanic like this would not just be dropped into a game by them with no explanation. And in fact, there is one. Just one given in Leviathan. Within this web novel prequel to Limbus Company, our dear guy Virgilius utilizes a power named Shin, an ability that allows him to use his own memories and emotions as a source of strength, moving his body with only his mind and manifesting rings of moon light. This ability is also called, as relevant to this video's topic, the power of Sin, and it's alluded to have its origins within the very same light that can cause distortions in EGO to manifest. The sins in this case, similarly to what the Sign of Rose's observation log says, are the very feelings and memories used as a source of this power. At least, that's the short rundown of it all. Virgilius did a fantastic video covering what the sins are in the universe, and I highly recommend it if you want a more in-depth breakdown of what the sins are as a part of Project Moon's ever-growing power system. But this isn't exactly what we're looking for, is it? After all, knowing that sins can be used to power Shin doesn't really give us insight on what the individual sin affinities mean for the units that use them, or if there's any deeper meaning behind what resources every EGO needs. And Hohenheim's descriptions are nice and all, but they're incredibly broad and don't really showcase the full range of each sin. That's why we're here, to get to the bottom of this specific mystery. Hey, I'm Mulberry. I haven't really talked on my channel before, this is kind of my first video essay-like thing. I'm not exactly alone in this endeavor either, and so, would my partner in crime care to introduce himself?
Hi, I'm Lou. You spend any amount of time on the analysis side of Limbus Tumblr, you might recognize me as the guy who made this post, among other things. Let's just say, this isn't my first time going down the sin analysis rabbit hole, so I thought I might as well give Mole a bit of a helping hand here. Besides, the old post hasn't aged all that well, so why not do a retake in a more accessible format alongside another mind who thinks alike?
Absolutely. I don't think this entire thing would have been possible without Lou's help. I've included a link to Lou's socials in the description, so go check him out. This series is planned to be episodic, with each video being a different sin, so stick around for the future videos. With that said, introductions and all aside, shall we begin? When it comes to the sins, going in with any preconceived notions of what they are is an inaccurate guess at best and outright mischaracterization at worst. While it's definitely important to consider these as basis and inspiration in a sense for Limbus Company's interpretation, they are definitely not the same. I consider this interpretation as mixed with that of Virgilius Ponticus's 8 evil thoughts, as the gloom sin is inspired by the evil thought of sadness. For reference, the 8 evil thoughts are the origin of the 7 deadly sins in a sense, telling monks how to live their lives properly. It's important to remember that the sins are more so a mindset than an actual committed vice against someone, as this is something carried on into Limbus's interpretation. The deadly sins are a pattern, a habit, a set of thoughts that lead to physical sin, and as such you're going to hell. By God, that's a confusing set of words.
Thankfully, we won't have to rely on other texts for the sake of this analysis, religious or otherwise. After all, Limbus itself gives us quite a bit to sift through just by itself. The pecatula, the descriptions in Leviathan, their dungeon floor theme packs, abnormalities tied to the very concept of sin, even just individual characters and abnormalities who happen to be directly tied to specific sins. So, let's just cut to the chase. Since we've got 7 of these skills to go through, might as well go in rainbow order, no? Let's start off with a bang, or perhaps with a burn.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Wrath as a sin outside of the context of Limbus is an interesting topic in and of itself. The feelings it's associated with, that being anger and hatred, are by themselves usually considered to be morally neutral. Acting out because of one's rage only starts being considered a sin once it reaches a certain point of excess, causing undue harm, whether in severity or in direction. At the same time though, wrath is one of the emotions God is distinctly shown to express, in which case those wrathful acts of divine retribution are upheld as righteous and justified. It's honestly kind of a rabbit hole all on its own, which thankfully I am not delving any deeper into. So, let's focus on why we're here, how the sin of wrath is interpreted in Limbus Company. Let's start off with the associated pecatula, a pattern that is likely going to persist for the rest of the series. Pecatula irae are branch-like textured entities covered in glowing liquid, or as Heathcliff puts it, red water. This red water is what these pecatula mainly use in their attacks, causing burns both figurative and literal depending on the pecatulum stage. The weakest one merely causes heartburn, irritation, and the feeling of suffocation. Stronger ones, however, can spark actual flames, or even have a liquid comparable to lava and heat. Heathcliff describes various feelings of anger and impatience in his logs of the pecatula. However, it's the one he gives of his frustration in his stage freeze log I'd like to hone in on. There he says he feels like he's about to burst, like he's trapped in. This idea of entrapment and frustration is actually key to understanding wrath as a sin. See, despite Hohenheim's description of it mainly focusing on it being an indiscriminate type of rage, there's another element to it on the opposite side of the spectrum. Repressed wrath, unbound wrath, emotional repression. These are all the names of floor theme packs related to wrath. See anything they have in common? This recurring theme of repression, of being locked in, is just as important to wrath as wanton destruction. Hell, even Hohenheim himself goes on a rant about Limbus Company sinners being prisoners, and having no right to refuse, right before his brief and comparably lacking in detailed description of wrath, as if that rant was a lead-in to his point about it. Speaking of theme packs, let's talk about the abnormalities in them. Let's briefly start with Skin Prophet, as we'll get more into its deal in the next sin section. The wrath elements here are clear. Skin Prophet desires doom and destruction of all indiscriminately, all of its wrath skills being either references to direct passages in its Book of Prophecies, such as 9.2 and 6.5, or expressions of its yearning for skills such as longing and scorn at the prophecy. The candles also use wrath skills, literally spraying flames to the sinners. This is of course an example of what Hohenheim was talking about. Wrath as something that burns until there's nothing left to burn. A book that predicts destruction for all, its prophet who desires it above all else, and the candles that burn all who touch them. We'll be seeing this theme of wrath abnormalities quite often. One such abnormality being Ardor Blossom Moth. The moth cares for only one thing, spreading its embers and setting fire to everything around it. The more ember status effect it has, the more wrath affinity skills it uses, as it changes the affinity of its already existing sloth and pride skills. The two skills that do start off as wrath affinity on their own, Stoke the Flames and Ardor Blossom Star, are both AoE attacks that inflict debuffs on all enemies. You could say, case closed, we have another Skin Prophet situation, right? However, Ardor Blossom Moth adds a unique side to its wrath, that being its indiscriminate nature causing itself harm as well. It's described as burning to death in its MD event, the flames on its wings die out repeatedly in its attempt to spread embers in the Checkup Dungeon event, and Faust notes its self-destructive tendencies in her LCE identity. Wrath so potent the moth cares not if it has to burn as well, as long as everything else burns with it. It's actually quite reminiscent of Scourged Girl from LobCorp, who wishes for the world to burn just like she did. The main difference being that the moth is akin to a phoenix. Its fire rises from the ashes and is stoked every time it extinguishes. Perhaps that's why it cares so little about itself in its quest for destruction. One could say much of the same about the Brazen Bowl. The person within the brass torture device lets out their rage by indiscriminately ramming and charging, going on a full rampage. The bull's wrath skills ram, pin down, and charge in being the only ones named after physical attacks, whereas its sloth and gloom skills are named after its sorrow and noises it makes respectively, certainly points towards its wrath being primarily that blind destruction. However, there is another side to the brazen bull's wrath. Something that gets pointed out about it by the text is the pain it's in its imparted frustration, the fact that it is trapped within the bull, thus in its unquenchable thirst. In fact, its second ego gift even alludes to this side of wrath, being named Pain of Stifled Rage. The person inside the bull is being stifled, repressed, trapped in its own pain and frustration, and the only way it can relieve some of its steaming, building rage is through going on a rampage, destroying everything around itself due to being unable to escape itself. Now that we've gone over all the wrath-related abnormalities, how about we turn our attention elsewhere, to distortions? Thanks to Hohenheim's efforts, we now know what sin each distortion is most associated with, and it just so happens we have one distortion associated with wrath. Drumroll, please! Welcome, Papa Bongi, into the ring! That's right, the owner of Yunbong's Bar and Friars, also known as Papa Bongi, is our only wrath distortion as of the writing of this video. Now, I'm sure some of you might be thinking, how in the hell are we going to extract any meaning out of a literal joke character? But you see, this is Project Moon we're talking about. If there's anything PM are good at, it's hiding the meaning behind comedy. See, Papa Bongi's story is a simple and straightforward one. A restaurant owner whose recipe got concept incinerated, putting him in a situation with no way out. Unable to remember the recipe nor keep his customers, the man distorted and began rampaging in Nest K. It's only after some frustrating trial and error that the sinners managed to find him a way out of his hopeless situation and pacify him. If you've paid attention to the previous sections, there might already be some gears turning in your head. You've got the indiscriminate destruction part of wrath for one, through Papa Bongi's blind rampage on the streets. His combat mechanics corroborate this. Both of his wrath skills involve him directly attacking an enemy, while his one last skill summons more minions. Something that might be important for another sin section. Back to wrath, however, there's another layer to Papa Bongi's own wrath, that frustration, entrapment. Would that not be what he felt when he ended up in that hopeless situation, unable to do anything but watch as his memories of his own recipe faded? In fact, Papa Bongi gives us the clearest view of the kind of situation that would lead to such a rampage, as he's repeatedly told by the perpetrator of the concept incineration that nothing he does can stop the recipe from disappearing. On the surface it's a joke, but at its core it's quite tragic in a way. Papa Bongi paints wrath as a form of defiance against hopelessness, an attempt to do something to change fate, even if it means destroying everything around oneself. I feel like we're still missing something though. How about we check up on Mr. Wrath himself, Virgilius? That's right, when joining the fight against the Wild Hunt in Canto 6, Virgilius has nothing but wrath skills. But why is that? What's with some of these skill names? Following the flow, I shall open the path, silence? Let's take a better look at the man himself and his backstory, his issues, and his goals. For that, we have to go back, all the way back to Leviathan. See, Virgilius had one goal. He knew the city was irreparably wounded, and thus he wanted to keep its blood flowing, to pierce through the city's scarred core and bring change. To do that, he would kill many people, indiscriminately destroy many families, and leave many children orphaned. It would be those very orphaned children that would make him repress that desire, seek a path that's kinder than his prior rampage. Already, we have the indiscriminate destruction and repression of wrath, but it goes much, much deeper. There is something else about Virgilius that is important to know. He is able to sense the flow, the very course of fate in this world, and every time he tries to act against it, to follow a different flow, tragedy strikes and he's back on course. This hopelessness against fate defines Virgilius at his very core, and all he can do in response is follow the flow that points towards violence. How deeply wrathful of him. Even now, as he works with Limbus Company, he's trapped by the contract he signed, unable to do anything but watch, with the only way for him to do something being to blindly break that contract and direct himself towards destructive actions. Indeed, Virgilius truly encompasses everything that wrath is to a T, the hopeless inability to do anything leading to senseless blind violence and destruction. Wrath is a hideous emotion. That is what Hohenheim says after his distortion is defeated, the memories of his time at L-Corp and their tragic end brought to the forefront. He despises that part of himself, and tries to repress it until the bitter end. Even as he's broken down, we see him holding on to the fake version of events. He says he did nothing at the entrance of that branch. A bold lie, as we see a CG of him desperately trying to dig through the rubble, covered in dirt and his own blood. Unable to save anyone but himself, unable to do anything but watch and remember. A wrathful response, yet in its powerlessness, unable to do any damage. Wrath isn't hideous. It's messy, sure, but it's human to be messy. No, I think it's more so tragic. It's a sin of blind rage and destruction, yes, but the anger isn't born out of nowhere. The root of wrath is entrapment, frustration, hopelessness. Wrath is what you feel when you can do nothing but watch, but decide to try doing something anyway, even if it means hurting others or even yourself. Everything you care about is already burning, so why not burn everything else as well?